All right, so welcome to this random, it may not actually be on YouTube, but YouTube version of class. I'm going to keep it kind of succinct so that you don't have to sit there and watch this whole thing for like almost 2 hours where it would be in class. But I will get through some stuff. I will include the occasional video, but that's where I'm going to cut time. So if you follow along on the PowerPoint online, be sure to check the notes section for other videos if you want to watch them on your own. But I will continue on. I believe we left off here with this slide. So we're talking about the spread of agriculture to Europe. And one of the societies that we get into is called the Linear Band Karamek. And this culture is the earliest farming communities that emerged around 7,200 years ago in Central and Western Europe. It is also referred to as LBK culture, and I have it abbreviated like that in the next slide just for space. What they created is they started to live in what are called longhouses. And as you can imagine, they are long rectangular homes. They measure up to 30 meters or 98 feet in length, and they housed extended families, and they really utilized all the space. You can see on the image on the screen that they built up with the high ceilings. So not only were these long, they were tall. And you'd have multiple fires in there to keep it warm. And if you had fires going and all that smoke rising up to the ceiling, not only did you have openings so the smoke could leave, but they used that space to smoke meat. So they would hang fresh meat up there and use that as a way to dry the meat to preserve it. Because almost every culture has some sort of jerky that they make, which is just a cute thing humans do. We like to preserve meat, and jerky is how we do it. Now, we also found wood-lined wells at this site. One well had very well preserved plant remains, which included einkorn and emmer wheat, peas, lentils, and linseed. Linseed would have been used as an oil for both cooking and fires. There were wild fruits, including strawberries, apples, and raspberries, and there were hazelnuts. And here's the fun part. It also included black henbane, which is a strong hallucinogenic. So, a cool thing about humans, or at least a fascinating thing, is that as far back as we can find human activity, there's pretty much been the use of things to get you a little messed up, be it making beer, eating hallucinogenic herbs, hallucinogenic mushrooms. Yeah, for some reason, humans like to find stuff that makes them feel a little different. So the LBK culture was no different. Now, some LBK sites show evidence of violence and warfare. At one of the sites, Telheim, it's a site in Germany where there is a pit that contains a mass grave of about 34 individuals. So it included 11 men, 7 women, and 16 children. So it is a sad moment. It is a mass grave that we uncovered. But what we can learn from that is that there was most likely warfare going on between groups, because 20 of these individuals were killed by a blow to the head. Most likely a club or something, someone attacking them, probably in hand to hand combat. And 2 of the adults were killed by arrows to the head. So you definitely had some distance killing as well as some up close, like I said, hand to hand combat. And then lastly, with this chapter, you remember Otzi the Iceman. He was a member of the linear band Karamek culture. So he was the natural mummy of a man who lived sometime between 3350 BC and 3105 BC. And he was discovered in September of 1991. He was discovered in the Otzal Alps, that's where he got his name, on the border between Austria and Italy. He was found with a dagger and scabbard found with along with him. Sorry, I got repetitive. What you can see though in the pictures, so the top picture is a reconstruction of what he probably looked like, and you can see the dagger on his hip. And then the picture below is a picture of his actual dagger found. So what's amazing is because of the ice, it preserved the organic material of both the haft, the handle, and the sheath it was in. Excuse me. So that is it for chapter 7. Don't go anywhere yet. Here's your teaching assistant. He wanted attention, but now that he's getting it, he's not so sure. So I will get into chapter 9 and go through that. It is heavy about domestication of animals, including this guy. No, we don't get into cats this time. We already covered that. I know. Okay, so chapter 9. As I mentioned, this is heavy into pastoralism, but I cut out a couple of cool videos, in my opinion, so feel free to check those out. Anyways, it is a feast of diversity. So, what we're going to go through is the role of pastoralism and the timing for the introduction of pottery in Africa, the nature and significance of the archaeological site of Cook Swamp in New Guinea, the relationship between the origin of village life and domestication in the Andes, and then lastly, the evidence from the 2 centers of domestication in China. So, as always, we start off in Africa. In Ethiopia and Eritrea in northeastern Africa, there's a wide range of plants domesticated. That was terrible grammar. It should say were domesticated. This is including grains such as teff and finger millet, which are essential to the local diet. A local domesticate that has had more global impact is coffee. I'm a big fan. Unfortunately, the timing and process of the domestication of all these plants are currently poorly understood. So we don't really know exactly when they were domesticated, but we do know that they were domesticated in Africa. In Central Africa, there were 2 critical cereals, pearl millet and sorghum. These were both domesticated. It is most likely that pearl millet was first domesticated in the Sahara, but the location where sorghum was first domesticated is not known. So hopefully we will figure that out someday, but right now we're not really sure. In West Africa, African rice called, oh, I'm going to completely mess that up, Oriza glaberrima. That was probably terrible. If anyone knows better, let me know. But this was domesticated in West Africa, so better known as African rice. So pre-agriculture, what we know today, with the landscape we know today, the Sahara Desert is the most dominant feature of North African landscape. Between 14,000 and 4,500 years ago, there was an increased rainfall in the area, allowing for human occupation. And yes, my cat is going nuts in the background. I don't know what he's playing with. But you can hear the little jingly bell. So basically, what we know today as the Sahara Desert, it wasn't a desert back in the day. It was a lot more lush and it made for a much better climate to live in. There are still people that live in the actual desert today, but it's kind of hard to do farming when it's a literal desert. So in the area, it consisted of small villages of hunter gatherers or foragers who lived within this area. They had a very similar culture to the Natufian culture from chapter 7. Differences, however, are that they were creating pottery and using storage pits in Africa well before they were using them in the Middle East. So the Nabta Playa is an area in the Egyptian Western Desert that was the location of a series of pre-agricultural and early agricultural sites located along the edge of a lake. It was a village of 15 square or circular huts in 2 rows. It was occupied around 9,000 years ago, and they were also using storage pits. Storage pits probably don't sound that exciting, but for archaeologists, it gives us a glimpse into their pre-thought, their planning, and the fact that they were sedentary. Because if you are nomadic, you don't have a storage pit. You are just whatever you can carry is what you move with. Anything else gets left behind. They were also making pottery, mostly small jars with impressed designs. And they had a lot of plant remains, excuse me, found in this area. So what we do know is they really liked wild sorghum, which I have pictured on the slide because I had to Google it. I wasn't sure what that looked like. So another site is Uan Afuda. Uan Afuda is in modern Libya. Get down. Is in modern Libya. It is a pre-agricultural site in the Sahara that yielded evidence that wild sheep were kept in the pens in the back of a cave. So this site included a cave, and it was occupied between 9,000 and 8,000 years ago. There is amazing preservation at this site, so we get excited about this one. Some of the things we found include wooden artifacts, basketry, and a lot of charcoal and seeds. This showed that they were doing cooking, um, gathering of seeds. They were making, while they weren't making pottery, they were making baskets. Now, what's fascinating is at the back of the cave, we found a 10-centimeter deep bed of animal dung, which is a nicer way of saying poop, and plant remains. And that was at the back of the cave. So the dung belonged to wild Barbary sheep, pictured on the slide. That's what they look like today. They might have looked a little different back in the day, but it was the wild sheep. So we know that they didn't technically domesticate those sheep, but they had tamed them because domestication means that they are solely reliant on humans for food, survival, and reproduction. And these were just tamed, and we were penning them up in the back of the cave. So we were kind of on our way to domestication, but not quite. Another site, I think this is the last one from Africa, is Gobero. This is a site in the Sahara alongside an ancient lake where hunter gatherer occupation dates to between 9,700 and 8,200 years ago. The pictures I have are of the site. It may not look like it, but the top is where the lake used to be. And the bottom is Paul Serrano. He is the archaeologist, and I think he's the photographer as well. So if you Google him and this site, you'll find a lot of high resolution, like really good photos. So just in case you're curious. This site included a cemetery, so we were doing intentional burials and we were planning. So instead of burying people under their houses, we were doing it in a removed special section. The occupation and village was located on a peninsula in that large lake. So think of like a smaller Michigan. Peninsulas offer a wide range of weather and agricultural zones. So it's, ideal. Fish made up a lot of their diet, most of their diet. So they were reliant, even though they were starting to, possibly do a little bit of domestication, kind of pre-agriculture. They were also reliant heavily on the fish available at the time. And the artifacts we've found from this site include barbed bone points, bladelets, and pottery. So the barbed bone points I can't say that word for some reason. Barbed bone points were proof that they were fishers. They were fishermen. So we'll get into pastoralists in Africa. A pastoral society is a mobile society with an economy based on herds of domesticated animals. A good way to remember this, if you even if you weren't raised in a Christian church, you've probably heard of a pastor before. And they usually refer to like their flock. Um, Same root word. So it's basically like a shepherd. A pastoral society is still common today. I don't know if I want to say common, but it's not super rare. Unfortunately, a lot of the societies alive today that are pastoralists are dwindling due to land usage, but That's a topic for a different day. So most of North Africa domesticated animals before they domesticated plants. By about 8,000 years ago, domesticated cattle, sheep, and goats were widely found throughout the Sahara and northern Africa. An example of a pastoral society alive today would be the Sami of Sweden. If they look familiar, it's what Disney's Frozen ripped off for one of the male characters. They got in a little bit of hot water for it too, because they didn't really give credit of where they got this character. But they do raise and domesticate reindeer or caribou, and they live in Norway and Sweden. And one of the issues that they are facing today is kind of the urban sprawl where cities grow and grow. And so places that have been migratory paths for these reindeer for generations, there's been, highways put through them. And the poor Sami people are like, how do we herd our herd of reindeer across a highway? So that's an issue they're facing today. But they are a fascinating people, and I do love their traditional dress. It is very colorful and just gorgeous. So we will move along to New Guinea. This is the island of New Guinea. It is divided into, on one side, on the right, is Papua New Guinea, and on the left is an Indonesian province called the Irian Jaya. Again, I'm sorry, I probably mispronounce words, but I'm 100% serious. If you know how to pronounce a word and I butcher it, feel free to be like, Stephanie, I know how to pronounce that, because I'm happy to learn, but I'll stop saying that. Anyways, so during glacial periods, this island was connected to both Australia and Tasmania by land bridges. But as the glaciers melted and the water levels rose, those land bridges went away. Now, the New Guinea Highlands run the length of the island at an elevation between 1,300 and 2,500 meters. Modern societies that live there, they rely on pigs and sweet potatoes for subsistence and social hierarchy and political power. There are competitions every harvest season to see who grows and has the biggest sweet potatoes, and then that is literally how you can gain political power. New Guinea did independently domesticate yams, bananas, taro, and possibly sugarcane. The landscapes in New Guinea changed over the years. So there were coastal sites on the Huon Peninsula that show human occupation as early as 40,000 years ago. Humans occupied the highlands by 30,000 years ago. And one of these sites is called the Cook Swamp. It is a site in Highland, New Guinea that has produced early evidence of agriculture. So, some of the things we've seen in this site include evidence of trying to drain a swamp and change the landscape. So, we found drainage canals, pits, and earth mounds, which means they were moving the earth around and trying to reshape this landscape. Now, one of the videos I usually show is just footage of the flood 10 years ago in Grand Rapids. The Grand River floods every spring. It always does. But it was the highest it had been in years. And so like office buildings were partially underwater and it was wild. But basically, we as humans have not learned our lesson. We are constantly trying to build up wetlands into being something they are not. Wetlands and the area around like rivers and lakes flood. And unfortunately, if you don't recognize that and try to build it up, if the flood is big enough, it'll still flood and your home will be underwater. So it's frustrating. But it makes me laugh to think that like we haven't changed in like what, 20,000 years. So in this site in New Guinea, we've also found banana cultivation beginning about 6,500 years ago. So we'll move along to the Andes. The Andes is home to the second highest mountain chain in the world. At its highest point, it is 22,838 feet. And that can affect a climate a lot. So it can differ if we're looking at the highlands versus coastal. The mountain range itself is divided into four zones, like I said, with each with a different agricultural climate. One thing that affects this area is the Humboldt Current, a current that brings cool waters from the south up along the Andean coast, accounting for the remarkable wealth of marine resources in the area. When we look at domestication in the Andean highlands, one site we can look at is the Guterrero Cave. It is a site in the Andean highlands of Peru where excavations uncovered the earliest evidence of domesticated beans dating to 4,300 years ago. There was some confusion and disagreement about the date of these beans. Um, but what the reason why we were confused is if you look at the law of superposition, and you look at the different strata, and you know that the lower they are, the older they are. We thought the beans were older than they were at first. But then what we ended up finding was evidence that an animal had burrowed the beans down further. So, anyways, we now know they date to 4,300 years ago. There's another site, the Panaloka Cave. A small number of quinoa seeds have been found in layers dating to between 5,700 and 4,500 years ago. At these sites is also the earliest evidence of domesticated potatoes from the Peruvian coast. These date to between 4,000 and 3,000 years ago. We owe a lot to potatoes. This illustration is an illustration of Inca farmers digging up potatoes from a 16th century Spanish document. The domestication of potatoes in the Andes date back to at least 3,000 years, possibly longer. So I do have a short video I want to include that includes the history of the potato. So I will show that now and then come back to you.